Yeah, there's plenty of
Okay.
it.
Calling the January 2016, I got the year right, DDA, Ann Arbor DDA Board meeting to order. Susan, would you please read the roll?
Tom Crawford. Bob
Here.
Gunzel. Roger Hewitt.
Here.
Marie Clough. Here. Joe Lowenstein. Al McWilliams.
Here.
John Moat.
Here.
Rishi Narayan.
Here.
Keith Orr.
Here.
Sandy Smith. Here. John Split.
Here.
Phil Weiss.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. First on the agenda, audience participation, and we have one speaker signed up. Ed Vilmetti, I'd like to come up and address the board, please.
Thanks, my name is Ed Vilmetti. I'd like to thank the DDA for its efforts to support various ways to make sure that pedestrians and bicyclists can make their way to downtown and make their way through the city safely through the year. This echoes some of the comments that I made to City Council on Monday. It's important that citizens beware that bright clothing like my hat not only useful in the parks but also useful in general to make sure that you're visible. And I'd just like to, as the DDA looks at funding various methods and measures for pedestrian safety as part of its efforts, to keep an eye out for bright clothing and blinky lights as useful and importantly cheap things to fund that would potentially save the lives of people who are cycling or walking late at night, who might otherwise be wearing dark clothes or not lit their bike because they can't afford to light their bike and buses don't run at midnight. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to address the board? Seeing none, we'll move on. Reports from city boards and commissions. Ray Detter, Downtown Area Citizens Advisory Council.
Last night's Citizens Advisory Council meeting, 6 Pioneer High School advanced placement students were there to join in hearing a discussion of some of the major issues that we're going to be facing in the year 2016 and beyond. And the CAC last night asked me to communicate to you our strong support for your resolutions and plans for the 5th and Detroit Streetscape project. We're pleased to see Smith Group JJ&R's outreach commitment to full involvement of not only the Carytown District, the North Central Property Owners Association, Community High, the Farmers Market, and the 04th Ward, which are all in that very same area, but to the entire Ann Arbor community. We are all stakeholders, we think, in this important project, because that market is a central location for everybody in the city of Ann Arbor. And we look forward to being a part of the focus group process as we move along. Although not up for the resolution today, we also support your efforts to develop a plan for improving the pedestrian traffic and parking design of South University. The process of public involvement has already begun with individual pedestrian surveys. We look forward to a process that will encourage participation of not only the many students that have now moved into the 3 high-rise apartments in the area, but also participants from nearby neighborhoods. Believe it or not, there are people in Ann Arbor Hills who still think of South University as something they hope will be restored to what they once visited all the time. And they're looking forward to being participants as well. Last night, the CAC also confirmed our support of the architectural plans of the core group and Majewski Architects for the new 12-story apartment building between Sloan Plaza and the former campus Insight. It will soon go before the Planning Commission, and we hope the process of neighborhood and developer cooperation in shaping this project, all of us were involved in it with the developer, will be a model for future developers of properties in the downtown. We are disappointed, however, that the proposed D2 project proposed for 615 South Main, that's the site of the South Main Market next to the floodway, did not follow the successful approach of the core group. Developers at 615 not only refused to have a second public participation meeting, even though a large number of interested citizens were unable to attend the first meeting because the packed library room was too small to hold them. They also refused to go 2 times to the design review group, even though that group encouraged them to do so. As a result, there is a large and growing neighborhood group that's now formed to resist the project, and that's unfortunate. Finally, the CAC is pleased that the two developers still hoping to build mixed-use projects on the library lot now recognize that a 12,000 square foot public plaza must be a part of their proposals. However, we still question the openness of the entire library block development process. We don't believe that either remaining development proposals provides the expected pedestrian connection and relationship to Liberty Plaza, the Blake Transit Center and the YMCA site, as well as the historic houses on the block, and also a clearly developed positive benefit to the district library. It's simply not there as far as we're concerned. We believe these are essential considerations in development of this important library block, and we feel that both the existing, still remaining projects should be rejected and we move on to a real discussion of really developing the library block in a very cohesive way. Thank you.
You ready? Next, DDA members' communications. Any communications from members? John, do you have anything?
I'd like to just share a couple of updates for city staffing that may help or interact with DDA staff. I expect to announce later today or tomorrow the new community services administrator, which would be Sumedh Ball's replacement. The city administrator search is continuing. I'm not remembering when the resumes or next step is. I think it's March. And the police chief process, I'll have a comment about that later this week as well. So I know this board interacts with all those individuals sometimes. In relation to that library lot, I mentioned last time that would be on the council agenda. I was expecting January 19th. I'm still expecting that. We're bringing it together. In relation to some comments from the public, there was quite a bit of public input along the way that was for the purpose of giving input into the developers. If council approves that the resolution, which is a recommendation to proceed with discussions, exclusive discussions with one vendor, the next step in that process is if an agreement is reached, then the project starts the site planning process, which is the more traditional role the community is familiar with for the city. It's that site planning process where I would envision the normal participation with the developer and the community having further discussions. I think what's happened to date, there should not be an expectation, if there was, that what's been done to date is the only time there's opportunity for public discussion. The city's in the position as owner in this property to go through one kind of roll-in phase, and then if it goes so far, it would be in the site plan normal phase after that. So I want you to be aware of that development progressing to council soon. Thank you.
Anyone else? I have a brief update. There was a sort of informal connector study meeting where we discussed how to proceed both with winding up the alternatives analysis phase and what would be involved in timing and going through the environmental impact study phase, as well as how to expand the public engagement aspects of the connector. So that is proceeding. The university is taking a pretty substantial lead in this, which is very encouraging. And I'll keep people posted. Okay, anything else? Executive Director, Communications.
So I have a couple things to talk about. The first is just a comment on general partnerships. Just to bring to your attention that the city, the DDA, and the Main Street Area Association are working together to replace trees in the general area of the Main Street biz. What's exciting about the collaboration is the DDA and city would be installing trees as we often do, but the biz is taking on the responsibility for ongoing watering and maintenance. It's an arrangement that if I can look to the future, it'd be great to have the same thing in place in South U when that biz is formed, and maybe in other places in downtown where there's an ongoing commitment once the trees are themselves planted. So that's exciting. And with regard to partnerships, just to point to the item on your agenda that the Capital Improvements Committee is going to talk about, which is the partnership with the city on what was a road reconstruction in the Carytown area, but now has a DDA element to it where we are looking to also do pedestrian improvements. And just to call it out for the terrific arrangement that it is. What's exciting about it is I think we get the best possible project by working together. I think we're maximizing our efficiencies, and I also think we're not only reducing costs by working together, I think the impacts on the neighbors will be that much less. So just to call it out for the partnership that it is, it's a tremendous thing that you guys have on your plate today. And then the last thing is just informational. I sent around a copy of the actual Swisher vacancy report. Some of you may have seen the story in the paper, but what's of note to my eye is as much as we're hearing about residential development downtown, something we didn't imagine was possible 10, 15 years ago, and now we're starting to hear about hotels, what they're calling out is the unbelievable dearth of office in the downtown. And it's worth noting as a development authority, because our work is never done. Where we play a role is to make sure that the mix of uses downtown remains strong, and that we're not just a residential community downtown, we're a commercial center. And the rising rents, though notable as it affects individual businesses, are worth noting. There's still not enough to cover the cost of construction. And if we're at a 2% vacancy, that next high-tech company, that next exciting business of whatever kind, that next job center can't come downtown. And I just wanted to put that in front of us as an agency that's concerned about the vitality of downtown, the but-for DDA. We are the ones who should be thinking about what can we do to encourage that first new office. The same way we were out in front of the residential development. We have a role to play with office, because with them come many jobs, and I'm sure this is something we'll take on in later discussions, but I thought you might be interested to see the report in its entirety. So thank you.
Thank you. Point out the 2.1% vacancy rate for downtown office is the lowest Swisher has ever seen since they started recording vacancies. That's a very, very low vacancy rate. Okay. Next, approval of minutes from the December 2015 meeting.
So moved.
Do I hear support?
Support.
Thank you. Any comments on the meeting minutes from the previous meeting? Okay. All those in favor of approval of the minutes say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, and then to subcommittee reports. I'd like to request with the approval of the committee chairs that we flip-flop the partnerships and capital improvements committee reports. We have Matt Carpenter here from AAATA to answer any questions and to maximize his useful time. I'd like to switch those around if we may, so we can address any AATA issues. Is that okay with John? Okay with Al? Is that okay with you? Okay, let's move on to Partnerships and Economic Development Committee. Joan is not here, but Al is.
Right. We have a resolution to extend the DDA's grant to the AAATA to create mid-block pedestrian walkway on 35 and 36.
Would you like to move that resolution?
I don't know if I can.
As a committee member, you can.
Okay. I would like to move this resolution.
Okay. Do we hear
Support.
John?
If you
Okay.
have questions, I'd be happy to.
Yeah. So I believe this is an extension of a grant that we already approved. We're extending the deadline on that, correct?
Yes, exactly.
Which was approved September 2014. Not to exceed 250. It is due to expire in June. The project will commence shortly and is asked the DDA to extend the grant, so it is paid out in the DDA's fiscal year 2017 and 18 budgets. Questions?
Good question. So I see that it's to be paid out of the 2017 and 2018 budgets. Do we know what distribution? Is it 50% each year, or do we know how you're envisioning?
Sure. We don't.
So with your indulgence, we're going to ask Michael Benham from ATA to speak to the timing of the project.
We don't know specifically how that's going to split. It's conceivable that it could all come even in the first year. We added the 2018 to kind of hedge our bets in case of project delays. But we'll know shortly when we go off for bid for the project.
Good, good. for our budgeting purposes, it'd be
Sure,
helpful.
and you'll be the first to know.
I don't know, there had been some talk that there would be potentially a pedestrian crosswalk that would connect the Liberty Square parking structure with this sidewalk. Is that going forward, or do you have any information on that?
Well, that's not part of our project, but we have been talking to the city about it. We recognize that the walkway kind of suggests the need for such a thing, and so we have brought that up with the city, and that's still under discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Well, this might be a question just for Susan or regular board. So we approved this grant already. It was allocated in the budget. We didn't do it. We didn't use it. How does this work within our full financial picture in terms of like we were, you know, it's not in our budget currently moving forward, right? So I'm just curious as to, does it have an effect, or I mean, because I assume this is a big enough line item where this has somewhat of an effect.
So the dollars have been carried in last year's budget and this year's budget. So if unspent, they would stay where they are, and at the end of the year, those dollars would remain unspent. Finance Committee will be meeting later this month, and if this resolution is approved, you would build into your upcoming budgets the amounts necessary to make, have the dollars available.
Right.
So there's no immediate impact. You would just add this in as part of your planning.
Okay.
In our actuals at the end of this year, we just showed $250,000 lower than we had budgeted, and an increase in the fund balance of that amount.
125 each year, just a small
125.
clarification. So yeah, 125 was unspent last year, and 125 will be unspent this year for
Right.
this.
Can I ask the reason for the delay?
Yeah, we've got a pretty small facilities group, and as you're aware, we have the Lake Transit Center under construction for the last few years, so that's been a huge project for us. Facilities group has been stretched, pretty thin, and so this project just we couldn't fit it in our bandwidth, so that's basically it.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion?
The only thing I think, like, I think obviously we should move, or I think this is something we all agree that we move forward with, but I think in terms of like how the procedure should go moving forward, it should be we set the budget, or we look at how it works within the budget, and then we bring the resolution as opposed to vice versa. I mean, I just think this is a little bit flip-flop, because we're going to approve it, and then we're going to be like, okay, how do we fit it in? Which is kind of contrary to a lot of the things we've been discussing over the last couple of years, which is let's budget and then move forward. So I mean, that's not an indictment of this specific project. I think it's just like in terms of the overall process.
Although this will be in fiscal year 17, and we actually haven't approved the fiscal year 17 budget.
Okay, fair point. So maybe the shift is fine. Like maybe there's no implication. I don't think Finance Committee has literally looked at what this implication could be prior to a resolution. I think it's just a procedural thing that we should think about for future things. Like I said, I don't think this is not my comment on this specific project necessarily. Anyway.
Yeah.
It is when we approve the grants, and it's a part of the policy for the grants, is that they time out, and if you don't spend it within a certain amount, I mean, that's built in, so.
No, I get it.
I mean,
but
if it makes sense, you could revisit that, you could extend that time period. I think it's prudent for them to come back and say, hey, we haven't.
No, I get that, but before a resolution comes for approval on the budget, I mean, so we did the timeout thing, so like it timed out, or it's going to time out, or whatever, and then I'm just saying, like, one of the big things we talked about was, over the next couple of years was make sure that we're looking at numbers prior to granting things, and I'm just saying we have not, I don't believe, and I did miss the last Finance Committee meeting, but I don't believe we actually said, hey, this is coming forward, they're going to be requesting this resolution, we should look at these numbers ahead of time. So I think then, like, are we like, hey, we know that these numbers work, we're comfortable moving forward, or is it we've done it, now let's figure out how to make these numbers work? I just like the general consensus of the last year has been the former, not the latter, not let's fit the numbers in there and figure out how to make it work. We spent a lot of time allocating which projects are getting what, so we know exactly how it works. And this isn't, this is a big enough line item that I think it's improved. So once again, this is not this project. I think we should not bring resolutions forward that are this big line item, even if it's like a matter of like, if this is a timing thing, like we got to do it on this board meeting beforehand, then maybe it's a finance meeting finance has to like meet urgently to do it.
It's like doing a purchase order.
Yeah,
after
I
you
mean,
made the sale.
right,
Or
exactly.
after
That's
you bought the
exactly right.
product.
That's exactly right.
So we just have the order flipped of, that's all.
Yeah, I agree.
Keith?
Let's see, two things. One, just to reinforce, I mean, obviously, it's revenue neutral because of this, but still, I completely agree. We should be doing that type of work in committee so that when we come forward, it's clear
That's
that,
correct.
Right.
it can be stated, yes, this is revenue neutral. I guess the other thing goes back to the point you were asking about the pedestrian walkway. I know we brought it up originally several years ago, and it already is an issue clearly. If anyone who stands by that area, that pedestrians walk mid-block, it's one of our longer blocks in downtown, and I completely am behind this resolution because I think it'll help the Blake Center, it'll help the whole transportation area. I think just anything we can do to encourage the city to look at that possibility of a pedestrian walkway at that point. I think it's just going back to that point of pedestrian safety. No, that's not. I think it's really important that we look at that.
Yeah.
And yeah, going back to Rishi's comment, I think that, I agree, I think that we should have some sort of formal policy through finance that any amount that we are spending here above a certain amount comes with a pre-approval from the finance committee. If that works for everybody.
That's great.
Okay. Any further comments? Ready to vote? Okay, all in favor of this resolution, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Passes.
I abstain.
Oh, and Alex abstains. Okay. Continue on your
Our next item is proposed committee schedule for 2016. And included in that is our next meeting, which is January 13th, 9 a.m. So slightly different is that we are having our meetings at 9 a.m. now. People have, that's been happening for a few meetings. It's a relatively recent change, right?
Yep, and the other thing that was discussed was to try to be more focused with some of these meetings. What we might do is invite our partners to join us every other meeting, and then continue having monthly meetings, but have a focus at that point. So for instance, one of the topics that the committee wants to delve into deeply is affordable housing. So on the every other month schedule, that might allow the committee to get more deeply into the work of the committee. So that's been proposed to the committee.
And I don't see where in this, is this deck of the schedule in here?
No. It doesn't matter, no, but we'll get the schedule out.
I believe it is already on the website.
The monthly schedule is on.
Yes.
Sorry, it's a little late, but.
That was at Jim's place. Who is not here.
Okay. We also will be having a meeting to review the grant applications. We've had 4 grant applications by the November 30th deadline. This is the first time we'll be using this new grant guidelines, so the full DDA board has been invited to participate in the grant review. The meeting is Thursday, January 14th at 2 p.m. right here in the DDA office. And it will be a hot meeting. Be there. Materials will be to us on Monday, so we can review things in advance. That's the Monday prior to Thursday the 14th, which is next Monday. Yes. So,
Al, that meeting
next
is
week.
to decide on those
Yes.
applications, to
Yes, yes.
approve, deny, adjust, whatever.
Right.
They would then come to the full board.
Right, to make a recommendation to the board. Got it, okay.
Yeah, so instead of Yeah. 5 of us doing it and bringing it to everyone.
Right.
So I would say that decision doesn't come out of that group. I think the recommendation has to go to the finance committee,
Yeah.
and then it has to be discussed from a budget.
Right. It would be wonderful to have some
Yeah.
finance committee folks at the meeting so that, I mean, I think having given a precursory review to a lot of these, like, I think there's gonna be a lot of good stuff, and part of the discussion is gonna be, how do we do the most in the most efficient way? And so that would be an important thing to bring with finance. To have at least someone who knows what we can do and what we can't do, and has some options, so.
I think that we already have a piece built into the budget that was dedicated for grants, and I think that if it's an up to,
Yep.
as long as it doesn't exceed that amount, I don't think that it does need approval from the finance.
I agree with you. If it goes beyond, well, we know that those are so much higher than what's available. So my only point would be if it goes beyond that, that's a different discussion. I agree.
In our board packet for Monday, or what our meeting packet, it might be awesome, it would be awesome if we could get what that number is available for grants, and maybe just a summary of that, because I believe it's higher than what the, off the top of my head, but I'm not sure.
Well, it relates back to what you've just described earlier, which is maybe coming out of committee at some point, a policy, because many of these grant applications ask for multiple year
Yeah.
grants.
Yeah.
So you have an amount approved for this year of X amount, but if they're asking multiple year, it would be asking for future board, funds ahead of the budget. So to your point earlier about establishing the budget and then having the grants assessed against it, that's why, again, it would be useful to have finance there, because it will be on the discussion of the finance committee this month about setting the budget. So they intertwine, absolutely.
I don't know that everybody has to be there, but someone who's more familiar with it, you'll be, all right. That's all I need. I just don't want the whole conversation to grind to a halt and have us sit on our hands because we can't answer like one simple question about it.
But we need the 10-year plan there,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
Or we need the 10-year plan on our kind of discussion, because at least we can get to see like, oh, well, this has no chance of fitting, or it's reasonable. Like
Right.
that's a simple, like reasonable or not reasonable. And then at least for the upcoming year where we have the budget, we can know like, this is what we had actually budgeted.
We'll have that.
And going back to the finance committee thing, I said, I think in my statement, pre-approved, but the finance committee needs to review things, obviously. I mean, it doesn't need to necessarily give its stamp of approval. It needs to review and make a recommendation, perhaps. Obviously, the entire board can decide something different.
Absolutely.
All right, so that's Thursday at 2, January the 14th, right here. Hot meeting. Finally, Susan just mentioned this. The committee discussed how frequently we meet in 2016. Continue to meet monthly. Reps from our partner organizations will be invited to join us every other month. Particular interest to focus on affordable housing at future committee meetings. The next meeting is Wednesday, January 13th at 9 in the morning.
Also a hot meeting?
Okay, thank you. All right, next, Finance Committee, Marie.
Where are we gonna go?
Oh, capital, I'm sorry.
We could just,
No.
we could just skip the
No,
most
I think
important part of the meeting.
No, I think we go back to capital improvement.
Speaking of hot meetings, I appreciate that we've had great representation from the board at our first couple of meetings, and things are starting to ramp up on the streetscape improvement projects. The South U update is that JJR Smith Group has worked with DDA staff on interviewing many people, I think 70 plus interviews with people on the street, meeting with the South U Association to get feedback and input. I think what's been interesting about it is the things in common and the things that there's some disparities about. So the things that folks seem to agree on are get rid of the planters, the pavers look outdated, sort of that sort of more aesthetic aspect. Needs to be easier to clear snow, those sorts of things. The area of disagreement maybe that's the most profound and interesting is the notion of whether or not to preserve as much parking as there is there now, whether to extend sidewalks. You know, that it's, again, as we've talked about before, the restaurant versus retail and other uses. And so that's an interesting thing that, at least in speaking to folks on the street, there's, and within the association, there's just different opinions about it. So that'll be interesting to work through. The other thing that you'll see at your place, Sandy just grabbed hers, there's a graphic that is, I think, very helpful because it's an inventory of what's there now. Those of you who went on our walkabout might find it really interesting to stare at this for a while, because you may be able to relate what you saw out there wandering with what you're seeing on this map. And I'm not going to get into a lot of detail, but I'd highlight things like what's been commented on about the intersections, about loading areas, parking areas, where the trees are clustered. You know, sometimes it's almost easier to look at a plan like this to understand the organization of something than it is actually walking it. So when you get a moment, you know, take a look just to familiarize yourself, because this is what we're going to be working off of when at our next meeting the team comes and presents options and concepts and ideas. So it would be great for folks to kind of have this as a reference point to really thoroughly understand what is there now.
Hey, John, question
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah.
Does SGJJR, as I like to call them, did the interviews they did on the streets, did they compile that in like a spreadsheet or anything like that, or or
What format? Maybe Amber can tell us some more about.
You know, some light reading at 2 a.m. That might be.
She only looks at things in database.
I only like things in spreadsheet form. So.
They
Yeah,
filed it in more of a graphic form, and
of course
I do believe it's available on our website, and I will double check that after the meeting.
Okay.
You might call out that there's a section on the website for South.
There is a section under current projects, the South University project is on there, and that's where we are uploading these documents.
Amber, if you find that to get to graphic form, they actually had some sort of other form, feel free to pass that along.
I will ask them for a spreadsheet.
Okay.
I don't look at pictures.
I'm just saying, like, I want to read the comments. You know, I think it's interesting.
So a couple of other things on this are that there'll be another round of public meetings in February. So if you know folks who would be interested in participating, put the word out. The other thing that I just want to make sure folks are clear about is when we established the budget for this project, it was with the assumption that we were keeping the curb lines where they are. And we're likely to see some things come forward that are ideas for changing curb lines, whether it's eliminating parking, whether it's expanding sidewalks or bike lanes, all those sorts of things. And I just want to make sure people are acutely aware that that has budget ramifications and kind of trickle-down effect on other projects. So with that, any other questions about the South U project?
John, the
Phil?
series of meetings in February, are those more on-street interviews, or are those more formalized citizen advisory council type meetings?
I'll ask Amber to give us the big picture.
Those will be focus groups, so again, we'll be going back to the area association, we'll be talking to the University of Michigan, as well as the Downtown Citizens Advisory Committee, and then
Okay.
we'll have a larger meeting where we can invite the broader public as well.
You know, one last thing to mention that I found interesting, and I think Susan and Amber feel the same way, that in these interviews, many of which were with students, that they actually identify South U as their main street and being a really important place to them, which I think many of us would sort of go, you know, they're just walking through and they don't care and blah, blah, blah. It sounds as though, at least when those folks who are willing to stop and talk, you know, have a real interest in it and really do see it as their downtown, the core of where they go. And I think based on my experience from 100 years ago, undergrads usually don't go very far, right? You know, from where dorms are and campus. So for what it's worth, I think it's an important thing for us to keep in mind. Any other questions? So let's move on. 5th and Detroit. you will see in your package on page 13 the resolution. And before I move it, I want to point out that you'll see supporting information behind, including agreements with the city and scope of services, and there's various pieces that you may or may not have had an opportunity to look at, but they've been carefully vetted by staff and somewhat carefully vetted by me. So I'd like to move the resolution to approve a project budget for the 5th and Detroit Streetscape project.
Support.
I think it might be where it's a pretty short resolution. Let me just give it a fast read so folks in the public are aware. Whereas the DDA's development plan highlighted identity, infrastructure, and transportation as key strategies, and also recognized that an enjoyable pedestrian experience is one of downtown's principal attractions, as well as necessary element in its social and economic life. Whereas through board retreats in January and April of 2015, the DDA board prioritized 4 streetscape projects through 2021 and came to consensus on project timing, scope, and budgets. Whereas through these retreats, the DDA board selected 5th and Detroit streets from Catherine to Kingsley as one of these transformative project areas, and determined that the project may include new sidewalks, street trees, pedestrian lights, benches, bike hoops, crosswalks, and curb line, as well as traffic analysis and relocation of overhead lines. Resolved, the DDA board affirms its commitment to the goals set forth in the DDA development plan, and is ready to begin implementing the 5th and Detroit project as outlined in the board retreats. Resolved, the DDA board approves a total project budget of $2.9 million. Resolved, the DDA capital improvements committee will bring the DDA subsequent resolutions to initiate and approve construction services. So, I think that's a nice, concise way. As Susan alluded to earlier, an exciting aspect of this project is that it's a joint project with the city, and I commend all the folks involved. There's been a lot of detail to work through. When you look at what's in here, in the budgeting has been revised a number of times, and I think it's been a tremendous group effort. It's nice to have Liz on board now, kind of crossing those boundaries. And Tom, I just want you to know that the feedback's all been very positive from the city. So,
any discussion?
Just quick confirmation question. How has that budget changed from the retreat budgets and original projections? Has it changed at all, or?
I believe it is the same amount, isn't it? Yeah.
My recollection.
I was thinking 2.8, but 2.9.
Cool, I figured.
Yeah. No, and your point's well taken. I mean, we need, as I mentioned earlier about Southview and others, we need to be very aware moving forward from a budgeting point of view, and going back to Finance Committee, that if we want to make changes of any substance, we really need to be diligent about it. Yeah. Cool.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Resolution passes.
Great. John had a second resolution regarding 5th and Detroit, because we need to establish a design budget and enter into agreements with the city and the designers. So you'll see, is it on page 14, resolution to approve a 5th and Detroit street design budget and cost-sharing agreement with the city. You'll see further in your packet, there's actually a very nice breakdown of the scope of the project. On page 19, starts a summary of the scope of design services, and is really a nice way for folks here to understand the process moving forward, the different phases and the steps that we'll be going through. Then following that document, page 32 are the fees. And this is a lot of the work that I think folks have been going to really fine tune this. In a nutshell, the bottom line is that actually it's come down a little bit from the what was reviewed in committee. I think it's about DDA shares about $17,000 less than what you saw at committee, and similarly the cities is about $17,000 less. A lot of it's just been tweaking scope slightly. I think it's relatively straightforward, similar to what we looked at for Southview in terms, scope and approach and so forth.
So I would say back to what Al said, one of the things, as these things come forward and there's numbers in there, it would be great if we could just note what was in the budget, and so that when I look at this number, that I immediately know where it stands against it. And that would just be, because I don't remember all of the individual numbers, so when I sit here and look at that, I don't recall what the budget number was. I just want to make sure that, and if somebody has to write it down, then I know that at least it was double checked.
And to that end, some of this is iterative. Until the board approves a project, it won't show up in budget. There's some amount that's in the budget for capital improvements, but as a capital improvements organization, it has to be iterative. Once you've decided on a project, it's now real. Now it starts actually finding its way into a budget. So it's a little different than grants, where you have you also have control over that. But if the board approves this, or actually having now just approved the earlier amount, it's now substantively more detailed and more real, and the budget now will become modified to reflect this. It's in there already as a result of just staff appreciating that there will be capital improvements coming. But the allocations start getting more solid once the board actually approves the project, if that makes sense.
Well, if you're saying that the different pieces, as then you get more real or granular as you go forward, so then the numbers become very real. There still should be a double check, but here was the original amount and we've subtracted now.
Right.
So we have a relative sense that step 2 did not now leave step 5 to 8 short.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I'm saying?
I do, absolutely.
And in this specific case, these projects, unlike some things, we actually it was additive, right? Like we said, this plus this and this year equals this. So we have some kind of, probably more often than not, or more than what we usually have, is like this project we initially thought was going to be this much to fit this other budget, which is capital improvements, right? So does this amount come out of the 2.9 million? Okay, that was my main question.
And again, just to clarify, some of it is timing. So we put forward our budget in, let's say, March. The board retreat in April, where we clarified the scheduling and the timing and the dollars, didn't make it possible for this fiscal year 16 for whatever impact it might have. But now, as Finance Committee is aware of this, you'll be sure as you put forward your 17 or 18, whatever budgets, these will reflect themselves. So some of it is the timing of when the budget has to be assembled. It doesn't always work as well as we'd like with when projects actually are coming forward. So your point's well taken, though.
And I would note that the use of the 10-year plan is quite helpful in this case, because we can look out over a 10-year period and see of this 2.9 million what hits in which year, and look at the overall impact. But again, it's a modeling exercise, it's not a budget, two very different things.
But I think I being that maybe I was finance chair last time around, so I feel where Marie's coming from. So I'll say, like, if Finance Committee is now kind of taking onus and setting all these like expectations or whatever, I think one of the things is just like these numbers come out of nowhere. Whether it's modeling, whether it's budgeting, we should have the discussion around the number and whether it's fits is reasonable. And I think that's the main thing. Is like in this case, okay, we're talking kind of around in circles about whether it was whether it's granular or not granular. But at the end of the day, it's like, does 2.9 million make sense in whatever capacity you're talking about? I think that's, if you're backing up from it, that's all it really makes sense. Because then if it's like 2.9 million didn't make sense, that's higher than what we thought because we didn't look at it, then we find ourselves in issues. So I kind of echo what Marie's saying. I think we can do that, even if it's not like, oh, it's budgeted. It's more just like, we discussed this. This is in the realm of what we were talking about. This is the okay to move forward. of the specific dollar amount number. Just like we would of like this whereas clause has this word and this stuff, like this doesn't go with the spirit of what we said, and we make changes to resolutions all the time. Like, I don't think it should be any different than with the specific number.
Perhaps at the next finance committee meeting, we could look at a 10-year plan with, now that we've approved the budget for 5th and Detroit, put that into a 10-year plan so we can take a look at that at the finance committee.
Absolutely. Okay.
So perhaps we can go back, we hadn't voted on our resolution for the design budget, cost sharing for the city. Do folks have any other questions, concerns?
Okay. All in favor of the resolution to approve 5th and Detroit Street design budget and cost sharing agreement with the city, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Passes.
One thing is a point of information for folks. You'll see in your package on page 34, there's a map of this area. And one thing, just to try to help people not get too confused with this joint project with the city, is that we've got an area that's the area where we are working in concert with the city, and then there are a couple of areas where the city is doing their resurfacing work to the north and to the south. So in this graphic in your package, you'll see the yellow areas are the areas that the city will be working on. So as you talk to people, especially you folks in the Carytown area, this is a useful thing so folks understand what to expect and who's doing what to whom. Our next meeting is January 20th at 11 a.m. A truly hot meeting, as opposed to Al's.
Thank you, Jen. Okay. Finance committee, Marie?
We had our regular committee meeting, we talked about expenses, questions, things answered to satisfaction, and we talked about the upcoming budgeting process that will begin in January and end in March. And our next committee meeting is Tuesday, January 26th, and it will be a full thing that day at 1 o'clock.
Thank you. Next committee, operations, John Split and Keith Orr.
First of all, we have the monthly parking report at the very end of your very thick board packet. Page 37, so the last page of the packet. Hopefully everybody has read through it. If there are any questions, I'm sure that Mr. Morehouse would be glad to answer them. Seeing none. The 4th and William construction update. The new stair tower is open. There are a few punch list things being completed, but it is open. It is wonderful. Great, I think, at this point. Great. Anybody who's walked the old stairway wouldn't be surprised, but I think that the input we've been receiving thus far is very favorable. So it's very nice. And phase 2 is beginning, which is the tear down of the existing old stairway to put in an elevator in its place. And that will be happening cinder block by cinder block over the next month or so.
Hopefully, do they start at the top or the bottom?
They do start at the top.
Okay.
They figured that out. Took us a couple of meetings to figure that out.
So as a team, with further demolition and the experience we had on the first portion of being surprised, do they have anything in particular that they're wanting to look out for that could be a surprise?
They had a pre-demolition meeting, I think, to go over all of the potential issues, and there are still a couple of things they're looking at that they're not sure of until they actually, there are the drawings and there is what is actually there, but I think that they have ways of addressing those problems, those challenges should they pop up.
So it sounds like they've done everything they can.
They have done everything they can, but yeah, it's already taken them longer to pull off the roof than they were expecting because it was a bit different than they were expecting. So I think they've identified those things and are ready to handle them as they come up.
Okay, thank you.
And remind me what's the estimated time for phase 2 to finish?
Well, let's say art fair.
Art fair?
Any other questions for John?
Keith, I believe.
Should mention just that the new stairwell is designed by Carl Lukenbach, who has done a great job for us on a number of projects. And this probably is his last one for us. No? No, we hope not. But he should certainly deserve some credit for creating something in a not very attractive structure that is quite attractive.
Yeah, as you know, I love Carl's work, and I will sing his praises when the thing's done.
Let's see, not too much on transportation. GM, this is the second time they came to us, actually. To look to since I wasn't there the first time. But they are interested in car share programs similar to what Zipcar does. It's the way they present it to us. And they already have spaces at the university, 21 spaces. Their intention is to be operational later this month. And they want some spaces in the public parking system. We're going to be talking about that more at the next committee meeting to decide what sort of elements it would recommend for such an arrangement, including number and location. So this is sort of a warning that we'll be doing that discussion, and that will be coming to the board in all likelihood at the February meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a transportation question that's a little off topic, but maybe relevant? Is that, with all the thinking about Uber and Lyft and the movement of vehicles and all the rest of it these days, I was interested to see that the city made what seems like a fairly substantial change in the way commercial parking areas are handled. They're becoming taxi stands. And I'd like to know more about it, because I've had more complaints from people because it's in effect taking away parking at night. And I'd be interested to know if those taxi stands are also going to be available for Uber and other folks, or what that's all about.
So in fact, actually, that was not the city that did it. It was the city and DDA that did it.
Okay.
A couple of years ago, at our annual presentation to council about the parking system, we had a request from a city council member who also sat on the taxi board, if in fact the loading zones could be reused at night by taxis. What happens in the evening is there's an enormous second economy going on. When many of us are tucked in our beds sleeping, the downtown comes awake again. And there is amazing amounts of congestion because it's not being managed, with either taxis or Uber, circulating, waiting for patrons, or parking at the corner, which makes it impossible to make a turn, or blocking alleys. And the request was if we could give staging areas to taxis, which are regulated by the city, that would at least begin to minimize some of this. So through a shared committee of DDA and city staff, along with a lot of input from people like our the referee, the ticket referee, and others, we chose about 24, not all loading zones. I know everybody likes free parking, but only about 24 of them are now available for use at night by taxis. Specifically, no, Uber and Lyft are not regulated taxi services, but in the evening, there isn't a lot of regulation happening. But what it has done is it freed up spaces for these cars to get in close to the curb to pick up a passenger, whether it's a taxi or an Uber. It is helping to minimize what is at this point somewhat, or was, chaotic congestion at night. 2 o'clock when the bars let out, it is a very difficult time to try to get through because there are so many vehicles circling, looking to get in and get a passenger. At least we've created some spaces for people to get in close, whether it's a taxi or Uber or Lyft, to get that passenger, instead of double parking in the middle of a street. And if any of you have been here at night, for all the complaints for free parking, imagine what's happening at night with these folks who are trying to get through, just get out of my way, and they can't because there's other economy things going on like Uber and Lyft double parking. So it is an element not so much to take away free parking as to recognize the evening economy is upon us. And we have to find ways to accommodate. We have to find ways to remember that downtown doesn't go to sleep at 5. It actually wakes up in some ways at 11 at night. So it's an experiment, and if we could get feedback from any of you who have contact with folks who are out to some of our younger board members out later than some of the rest, it would be helpful to know if this is actually working as intended.
So who will be monitoring it? Who's going to evaluate whether there need to be more or less, or changes need to be made? Is it us, or is it the taxi board, or kind of who
Yes,
does
to
what
both.
to whom?
And also, we have done this in partnership with the 4 downtown area associations. They were given an opportunity to both give us feedback on the concept at all, and then secondly, which locations. And we raised it yesterday at the Downtown Marketing Task Force for just that. Is it working? You know, are the locations in the right locations? Are you finding complaints? And again, other than I lost my free parking space, that we have not yet heard other complaints, and or not many. We heard one from an Uber driver, or maybe it was an Uber driver, who wasn't sure why taxis were being prioritized. But that's part of the regulatory part of this. You know, that's one of the benefits of being regulated, is the city can then work with you to figure out strategies. So I don't mean to demean Lyft and Uber, but rather as part of a taxi board process, that's where the request came from.
Right. I think part of what I've had several people say is that one challenge is the signs are pretty small. At night, it's hard to see them. There are a lot of people are getting tons of tickets from what I gather. You know, and it's always a hard transition when something like that happens. You know, that people start feeling, you know, what they were used to has changed. And
But they were parking in commercial loading zones.
Oh, I know.
Right?
I will check on it.
No, I know.
I will also
I'm
check
just
on the
reporting.
tickets, because that's part of this ongoing city DDA committee, and why we met with the parking referees. We don't want tickets. It should be clear. Whether people test it or not, that's, you know, but we need to be sure. I'll check with the city about the number of tickets that have been issued for that and see if we can get some feedback on that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
First of all,
Point of order.
rarely out. And if I am, I'm driving through it, having come back from visiting my parents or something, like a responsible young man. But driving through it is terrifying. But I think we fix all these problems with one other solution that really needs to happen. The congestion, safety, everything being chaos, at least in the Main Street area for sure, after midnight. The flashing yellows, the streetlights go flashing yellow, and people, when they have their full capacities, never learn what to do with those things, which is another problem altogether, but they just don't know what to do with them. So then when you subtract some capacities, or most of their capacities, as tends to be the case downtown at night.
Especially when Al's out.
It's pretty much, I don't think anybody does it correctly. So one way is flashing yellow and the other way is flashing red. And the people with the flashing reds stop and then go. And the people with the flashing yellows stop half the time and go half the time. And it's just complete, neither one of those things are correct, and they're just complete chaos all the time. And it's terrifying, and I won't even go anywhere near it. And when I have to go near it for whatever reason, I just sit there and wait until the coast is completely and entirely clear, because I have no idea what that other person's going to do. So no more flashing yellow. The economy starts again at midnight, and yet the lights switch as if there's nobody going to be out at midnight, which obviously there's tons of people out at midnight. So this is my problem.
We will extend this concern. This is very helpful feedback.
How many of us knew that they went flashing at midnight?
I don't know when they start. I know when they end in the morning.
Tom's like, I can't get home fast enough. Like, he's like anti this.
So noted.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
They'll call it the McWilliams rule.
Well, it's the same problem with the hawk. If you know exactly what flashing yellow, flashing red, and solid red means, the hawk makes a lot of sense. But since nobody really understands, there's just mass confusion down there.
Yeah.
It's a problem of education.
Among other things.
Yeah, hey, I'd take everybody's license away if I could, but I'm not allowed to, apparently.
Is there any other information from the Operations Committee?
Having got far afield.
Have you gone off track with that?
Our next committee meeting, Wednesday, January 27th, at a more reasonable 11 year.
All right. Thank you. Next, executive committee. Susan, do you want to just update us on what's going on?
Yeah, one of the roles of the executive committee is to review some of the DDA policies. And we've had a discussion over the last couple of months about our FOIA policies. We learned that the state was putting forward changes in July, and the board was asked to approve modifications to our policies in June. Subsequently, we had a chance to review the city policies, and we found that there's a lot more detail and clarity. So in the last couple of months, the committee's been putting together some tweaks to our FOIA policies that would make us more parallel with the city, and I think I raised this last month for you. So at your seat is a draft of what our work has arrived at this point, including a summary page, sort of giving you a sense of the changes. What our goal is to make ourselves more similar to the city so that our community has, I think that much, it's easier if things are more similar. So some of the changes that we talked about in committee, we drafted, and we'd like your feedback on. First is, for instance, adding details such as you can ask for a FOIA response in an electronic form. It doesn't have to be in paper. The state goes into detail about you have to set the cost for a piece of paper and how much it costs to copy that piece of paper. And increasingly, we're not doing paper. So that's an element that the city has that we don't have. It states that you have to give us a FOIA in writing unless you have a physical disability that makes that not possible, because it allows us to also have a record. There are people that are interested in following other FOIAs. They want to know what other FOIAs come in. So the more we can track things in writing, I think that's an important element. Clarification of fees, that for instance we won't be charging for a FOIA for less than an hour. It's clear. I think the city policy is much more clear than ours. Ours has things like unreasonableness, and that's not as, well, again, goal is clarity. We also have information that the city had that it makes it helpful to say if we're going to get a lot of them all at the same time, we're going to deem them all as one. The challenge is when you have, as we have received, sometimes two within 5 minutes of each other, the amount of staff time to actually do the document search, you might as well do them both at the same time. And so it's important to set forward that we would be viewing our calculation of time for the two at the same time. You can't just say we're going to do it later on. It would let people know in advance if you're going to FOIA us, give us some space between them, because again, when the staff are going to be doing their document search and accumulation and meeting with the attorney and so forth, it, for efficiency's sake, makes sense to put them together. But before we would make that change, we'd want to be sure to let the public know. So those are some of the basic elements that we're paralleling the city. I shared with the executive committee, there's some things that don't make sense to parallel. An example is the city, in its larger size, has an entire IT department. So there's content there about how the time is spent by the IT department to do the search. We wear many hats. We don't have an IT department. There's also content in there about a police FOIA, what would be shared, what the process is. Well, we don't have that as well. So there are elements of the city policies that we're not replicating. So we've drafted this. It's gone through a few iterations. We've shared it with city staff. We shared it with our attorney. We shared it with the committee. And now we're sharing it with the board to get your feedback. If you've got additional changes, clarifications, edits, the committee will continue doing its work. So it's very helpful to get any input you give us. Yeah, John?
I take it would be good to get feedback from folks by the next meeting, because the intent will be to bring a resolution forward at the next meeting. So people can find the time to take a look and contact Susan or somebody on the executive committee.
We appreciate it.
Do you process a lot of FOIA requests?
There are times when, yes, there's almost every week there's a FOIA, at least one. We've had as many as 4 FOIAs at a time.
Okay. And it's typical for staff to spend up to an hour on these requests?
It is often more than that. And one of the elements that I think is helpful in being more clear is it helps the person who's making the FOIA request to be much more targeted in what they're looking for.
Right.
Finding their way to that clarity allows us to be responsive, but it also ensures that they're not having to pay a cost. When it's more vague, they don't know how much can I ask for in one fell swoop.
It just
And it's
seems
our
to me
way
like
of
an hour of
making it.
staff time is still very expensive.
There's a lot of staff time.
Yeah. That's just why that is.
Well, and one of our
Yeah.
goals has been to continually add content to our website. You heard a few instances at this meeting where we're adding things to the website, so people don't have to FOIA, for
Right.
instance, to see the
Yeah.
South University materials. We want to be sure we have as much available for people to see on their own. And that's why it's helpful for staff to get feedback back and forth, so we can do a better job always making information available.
Do you have like an hour, average monthly hours on FOIA requests? Yes.
As I said, we had one instance where there were 4 FOIAs going on at the same time, so
Right.
it's
Was
very
that, like,
hard.
that's an outlier though? Wolf Week, though.
That's an outlier, and currently we don't have any, so it's really hard to say.
Right. Okay.
I don't know that we can say it's an ebb and flow based around the requests out in the community.
It probably varies too, not only in how many, but what the nature of it is and whether an attorney has to be consulted. And, you know, I would imagine that would have a huge impact on the amount of time required.
And that's an example where we're different than the city. We don't have an attorney's office, so we are hiring an attorney, and I have to meet with them, and we have to go through issues of redaction, and there are questions within FOIA that we have to be sure we're mindful of to, on the safe side of the DDA. And so there's a time element. We're just meeting with the attorney has its own time element.
It would be interesting to know how
Yeah.
many hours on, in a year, so because it's ebbs and flows. I mean, is it like a full-time person or a part-time person, or? Because I'd hate to think that all of that time goes to that when we have these very large projects that
Yeah.
need managing in time, and
Yep.
so.
Well, if it's getting up around like 4 hours a week, 5 hours a week kind of zone, it's painful.
Yeah.
It's a challenge for small organizations, and when the
Right.
state put forward its changes, there's 2 things to note. They excluded themselves. The legislature and the governor are not, as you are probably hearing right now about the Flint water issue, they're not subject to FOIA. And it has a particularly onerous effect on the smaller agencies. The bigger cities have staff, and they're sort of set up, and that's where the staff intentions go. But as an example, of a 4-person office, it is an enormous percentage of time. So it may not be the number of hours, but as a percentage of time, it is a great deal. But it is the state law, and we must meet the state law.
Well, I'm just wondering if while we're rewriting this, or putting more stuff on the website, like I think that's a great solution to minimize. It's like, hey, it's always there. You can get it yourself, right? So I guess just looking for ways to be open and be compliant while at the same time minimizing the amount of manual labor involved in it, right? So, which I think, probably the best solution is just making as much available as possible on the website and as accessible as possible, right? So
Yeah.
people can do it themselves. But if we have an hour budget, we can use that budget as a cost savings against the money it costs us to do those improvements, right? So that's where that's a good number to have.
Right?
Just as a point, I mean, a lot of the things that are being FOIA'd are things like email exchanges and, internal documents, and frankly, to put all of that online would cost more than responding to the FOIA probably. So,
Right.
It's the type of information that's being asked for. We want to be transparent about it, but, to try and put every piece of
Right.
paper up on the website is also
Yeah.
not.
But there's stuff like, I know, for instance, a lot of the stuff where it used to be at least was like parking numbers and things that people are really asking about a lot. And if that's something that we need to talk to Republic and say, hey, can you get this just up there so people can have it and we don't have to go anywhere?
And Susan, is the hour, is that more in line with what the city's policy is
That's
as
what
well?
the city,
Okay.
yeah, and what was helpful about it's clear, what unreasonable is, and I think the goal is also helpful on the side of people requesting information. By being more targeted in their request, they can stay within,
Yeah.
that's their target. And so I don't know that anybody looks to be onerous, so it's really helpful. This is the amount of information I'll need.
So that's why you said, if you get multiple requests from some person, you can take them as one and combine the time that's gonna take, so you can potentially charge them for it.
Yeah, and I mean,
Yeah.
that's an example, of staff have to review all their
Yeah.
files and have to assemble
Right.
everything, and meet with the attorney for efficiencies. If they come within 5 minutes of each other, I mean,
Yeah.
you're gonna have to tackle it.
Right.
And since the deadline is date specific 5 days later, you have to tackle them somewhat at the same time. And so, yeah, again, we want to be transparent, so the goal in this is to be clear, to make it easier, and to the extent possible, to put information available so people can help themselves. And Sandy, you were gonna, okay. Oh, John?
So one thing folks might want to be aware of at executive committee, someone asked a good question of whether Susan is the best person to be our FOIA coordinator, because, it costs time, costs money and all. And, I think the answer made a lot of sense due to the sometimes sensitive legal issues and the fact that Susan is really our primary person who's sort of our communicator with the public, and feels as though it should remain her burden to bear, and she should be the FOIA coordinator. I think most people at the executive committee felt that seems right.
Yeah, so
Okay.
very helpful feedback. I thought committee, the work you've been doing is really helpful. Any details you want to add to, it's all good. So we'll aim to bring it back next meeting, and any content you want to give us.
All right. DDA, Susan,
Yeah, as
DDA
long as
office
I'm here.
update?
So at our last meeting, we made the decision to renew our lease in our location. We have, the staff is working with an architect to find ways to make improvements to our office so we can get our work done better. I think we have a layout that is going to work for us that minimizes the cost for any demolition or construction of new walls. Mostly what we're looking at is a reuse of existing space just more efficiently. And that would save a lot of our budget then for things like storage. As you might guess, with these construction projects, with these design projects, the site plan work that Amber does, there's a lot of things that are still done in paper form. And this is an opportunity for us to use an architect to help us figure out a better way to have information available to us in the form of plans and others, but in a stored way. Right now, it doesn't feel very organized. So we're underway. Our goal is to have building permits pulled at the end of the month and stay within budget. So I think we're all feeling good about where we're going.
Good. Questions? Okay. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
One thing I probably should have mentioned in our operations committee, in anticipation of the Republic parking contract expiration in 2017, we are looking to hire a consultant to assess our current operational procedures to align with best practices in the industry and just give us an overview of how the parking system is working and whether there are any changes or improvements that they would recommend. And we have put out an RFQ in December that will be coming back. I believe it's the 20th of this month, so we'll review it at the next operations committee meeting. All right. The next executive committee meeting is Wednesday, February 3rd at 11 a.m. And is there any new business? Okay. Any other audience participation? Okay. Entertain a motion for adjournment?
Support.
No,
Wait,
someone has to.
I move it.
You move it. Second. All right. All in favor, say aye. Aye. We are adjourned.